Welcome back to RoomPack's ResEdChat podcast, a platform to showcase people doing great work and talk about hot topics in residence life and college student housing. My name is Noah Montague, and I use he, him, his pronouns, and today I will be your host. As you've maybe come to know in these videos as of late, I like to say that I am a storyteller by trade, and the stories that I choose to tell are those that center the student and the college experience, which makes me all the more excited about today's topic. So, with that, today we're going to be talking about all things Greek, and by that I mean fraternities and sororities, and how residence life staff are uniquely positioned to support students in Greek organizations. While much stigma exists around Greek life, and we will talk about that a little bit today as well, it is all the more important for student affairs professionals, particularly those in residence life, to talk about how we directly are thinking about working with students in fraternities and sororities. So today's guest is a friend and a colleague that I met all the way back in 2019, which I realized not that long ago that we know each other that long, which is
Long time.
super cool. Back when I was a grad student in residence life, and now I'm just so privileged to call her a friend and just a really special person in my life. So I'm super excited to introduce you all to her today. So with that, I'm gonna start off by letting our guest introduce herself.
Oh, thanks, Noah. And I feel exactly the same way. Very special person to me too, and a very good friend.
Thank
Yeah, it means a lot.
you.
Hi everyone. My name is Carter Roane. I use she, her pronouns. I work at Miami University as an RD. Work there with Noah. I guess another thing for the sake of this conversation that introducing myself is I am also a member of the SIU, which is a national Greek organization. We used to be local, a group called Delta Nu Psi that was up in New Hampshire. But we are now national. We are, even though I use she, her pronouns, we're all considered brothers in SIU. So even if you're, even if you're like, female presenting, if you're, you are considered to be a brother because they say just easier. So it's
Yeah.
like, we're kind of like, okay, so you just go with it. So, but yeah, I am a brother, I'm a member of SIU Upsilon. I've been involved in that. I'm a part of our alumni association. Um, Dabble a little bit with the sorority LLC here on campus. I sit in on meetings and attend like events, programs that are done. So so it's Greek life, fraternity sorority life is very much a passion of mine, something I probably will probably continue on in the field doing. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's me.
Thank you. So I
Yeah.
think you spoke on it a little bit already, Carter, but my first question really for you is if you could share a little bit about what your experience has been working with fraternities and sororities.
Yeah, I mean, like I was in an organization when I was an undergrad. And I really I really enjoyed it. It wasn't something I got more out of it than I thought I would get out of it. I kind of just did it more just to see if I could do it.
Hmm.
And my friends are doing it, and then I actually really enjoyed it. And then I actually ended up becoming like president of my organization. And
Oh.
yeah, yeah. And then we have like a thing called IOC, and Delta Nu Psi kind of fell under IOC.
Hmm.
Um, and I ended up on the executive board of that. And it was something I thought I wanted to go into the field to do. But res life was also very much a passion of mine. So so I kind of like it was always kind of the back of my mind. I wanted to do that professionally as well. But the schools that I worked at, none of them had fraternity sororities. So this is actually the first one that I've worked at that has one.
Yeah.
So I've been able, which has been really cool. I've been able to kind of like dabble, kind of a little bit in that, getting some professional development experience. Being able to be in, involved professionally. There were some opportunities back home, but they didn't really ever quite fit. Like I was like our house manager for a while, and I was kind of like unofficially kind of like a graduate intern for a little bit, but it was like unofficial. It wasn't like like an official position or anything like that. But they knew I could kind of maybe offer some perspective of some fraternity sorority life experience. So again, it's something I hope to do more of, in the future. Because that is very much if like res life is like my number one passion. fraternity sorority life is like 1A, right? Like right up against each other. And
Hmm.
and it's something I really kind of like, I really enjoy being involved in and the ups and the downs. I mean, and there are definitely
Yeah.
a lot of challenges, which I know we're going to talk about, a lot of challenges and a lot of negative parts of the of fraternity sorority life
Hmm.
that that definitely come with it. But it's very cool to kind of see somebody kind of grow into, in that community.
Yeah. I think for me, a couple of things that are standing out from your thing. Thank you for sharing a bit of
Yeah, of course.
your experience and where you've been with it. As you know, Carter, but not as our listeners know currently, I have not been very involved in fraternity and sorority life. I was not in a fraternity or sorority. I did not engage in that space. My undergrad was not very big on
Right,
fraternity life. And the fraternities that did exist were very quiet. Like we didn't hear about them very much, and that depended on stigma, that depended on a lot of things. Like they just were not very present on
right,
my campus. And now working at an institution like Miami, where 33% of our students are in fraternities or sororities, I find myself thinking about it so much
yeah,
more, which
oh
I'm
yeah,
sure you are as well, talking
yep,
about that experience. But for me, the majority of my experience working with fraternities and sororities has been the couple residential students that I've had here and there that have chosen that experience,
right,
have chosen to be involved in that way. I had an RA a couple of years ago who was the president of her sorority and was also incredibly involved in Acropolis, as one of the things that she was in, a huge leadership experience that she then brought back to the hall and like was able to do a lot of the things that she did there with us as far as like icebreakers and things like that that she learned there. But that was one of the reasons that I particularly wanted to talk to you about this today is that I'm significantly less familiar with this conversation than you are, and getting to be in this space together, I think is just going to be a really cool time.
yeah, exactly,
I
exactly.
think brings me pretty perfectly to my next question. In what unique needs or dynamics do you think that Greek affiliated students bring to the residence hall environment?
I mean, I think in terms of like unique dynamics, I think definitely like a sense of yeah, like a sense of like leadership.
Yeah.
And it could be, and it could even be like a, even if it's like a brand new brother or sister, maybe they were like the one kind of like they like in their pledge class or their associate member class. Could have been a group of like 20, and they were kind of like the president of that class.
Hmm.
So there's definitely those like leadership, there's like leadership dynamics. Community also kind of knowing that they have like another community outside of their residence hall
Yeah.
community that they are kind of like that they may spend a lot of time in. And it's not necessarily a slight against, the RA or the RD if they're not there. They're just somewhere else.
Yeah.
But some of them, some I've seen some members who want to do both, who like, they like living, they like the on-campus residence hall perspective, and they also like the fraternity or sorority perspective. So, definitely those dynamics. I think another need too is I think too, such with the young member, like maybe somebody in their first year or their second year, they're maybe looking for like leadership experiences within the organization.
Yeah.
So, maybe I think that's something that they could be searching for in some way, shape, or form, or learning how to be a leader. Because for them, maybe this is like they're 18, 19. This is the first maybe leadership role they've ever been interested in having. So
Hmm.
they want to kind of like learn more. Okay, how do I become a leader? What do I do to
Yeah.
take the next step? So I think things, those, those things. I mean, I think too, even like, some people join a fraternity or sorority because of like the networking.
Hmm.
They, maybe too, like they're looking for like, okay, how do I network with people? How do I network my alumni? And those kind of those I'd say those kind of things, for real, for sure.
Yeah. And those like that want for leadership and community is such an interesting space to be
Right,
in for students in Greek organizations because so often, at least in my experience, and I feel like you're going to agree with me here, that isn't the image that we have,
right,
like
right.
largely of why students might join a Greek organization. That's not what we're thinking about, but in the reality, that is why the
Right.
majority of students are joining these organizations.
Mhm.
And those line up so perfectly with what we're doing in residence life with RAs in leadership development and
Right.
all councils in leadership development and community building in that space offers such an interesting way to partner with these students in the space who we know are seeking out that experience. Like they're
Exactly.
very specifically like, no, I want to be in this organization that maybe my parent was in, maybe this
Mhm.
person was in,
Yep. Yep.
because they had a great community there, and I want that too. And
Exactly.
I think that that is such a unique need and dynamic that fraternity and sorority students have that maybe like a more typical or like a residence hall student that is not affiliated might not be looking for in the same way.
Right. Right, exactly. And I think too there is an opportunity for good partnership if both partners let it happen. Sometimes I think and I think it's hard too maybe because me being from the Northeast and then the Northeast is not as fraternity sorority friendly as it is like the Midwest
Yeah.
or the South. The fact I'm still always a little bit surprised that my college actually
Yeah.
had a system, but we did, but but yeah, it was like res life was over here and
Hmm.
like fraternity sorority life was over here. They could not have been more
Yeah.
separate from each other. And it was kind of unfortunate. It was kind of
That's
like,
a shame.
yeah, there's good work that can be done if you kind of get both parties kind of both open up their minds a little bit. And it just seemed
Yeah.
like my school they didn't want to do that like at all. And
Hmm.
there wasn't much of that. But here I've seen like I'm like a lot more, openness or at least like more, trying to definitely open up those doors a little bit more where there could be some sort of partnership, which I think is good. I mean, and like you were saying, I think when people think of fraternity sorority life, they're not necessarily thinking like that's like I think people think of like one thing, and that's like the social life. I think that's like the big number
Hmm.
one thing, and that is why some people do it,
Yeah.
and it is can be for some people can be a reason, but I think for many people it's not the only reason. I think they do want that sense of community that they really that strong community walking in and like there's like in my case 20, 30 members who become you know good friends and I think people that's very appealing to a lot of to a lot of people, and especially I think even nowadays, especially after COVID where we're all kind of separated from each other for a long time. I think now even more so than ever, I think younger people or college age are really kind of almost craving that
Yeah.
experience.
Definitely. And even like I've been thinking a lot recently about the identity and the spaces that go into like the creation of fraternities and sororities and like how they've historically like evolved and changed over time as different students are coming to campuses and how need changed. And now with especially like with some sorority fraternity members choosing to live on campus or becoming RAs, like that changes the need again.
Right,
Well, as we're having.
right,
But I think that
exactly.
you spoke about this already a little bit too, as far as like some misconceptions that might exist. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those misconceptions that might exist with Greek students specifically living on campus.
I mean, I think, and I kind of want to be clear about this too. I
Yeah,
kind of like, there are some misconceptions, but there are also some things where, the organizations have not helped themselves at all.
yeah.
They have not helped themselves at all. And I can speak of that as being an active member. I can speak of that as alumni. I can speak maybe to somebody now who is like a school, administrator. So
Hmm.
I'll hear about stuff like that. And I'm just like sitting there like, oh, man. Like like a part of me dies a little bit inside,
Like
It's like,
that was a choice.
right,
Hmm.
exactly. And it's kind of like, come on, you didn't, there are other ways you can do the things you need to do, or you don't have to, I'm just gonna say it, you don't have to haze a person to do it, you
Yeah.
know? You can build somebody up in a positive manner. You can, you can talk about the values of your organization. You don't have to, intimidate, hurt, people doing it. And this, anytime I hear about it, it kills me. It, really kind of, it's painful because that kind of feeds into people going, yep, there you go. There it is. There
Hmm.
it is. I think another misconception, a big misconception out there is like, when you're like, is buying friends.
Yeah.
Um, and I think people too don't, sometimes don't understand like a lot of times what you're paying for, a lot of times for the organizations, when you're especially for a national organization, what you're paying for is you're paying for the insurance.
Yeah.
Because every in the national organization, like, every member has to be insured. And it's, and it's one of those things you don't think about until something happens.
Hmm.
And I know in my organization, something like that happened. I think it was just like a weekend activity. People were just having fun, and one of our members got hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then and to the point, I think they had to have they had to be transported. But because he was insured, we were national, and because he was insured, that made the whole thing a lot easier than before when we were local and something like that
Hmm.
had happened. So I think, I think that's a misconception of people, like, that doing it to just to buy friends. And that's definitely not, and, I found that's like not the case. I'm like, I've had friends outside the organization where, I've also had friends who, again, like, I mean, when you pay for like your dues, that goes towards other things that could go towards, again, like insurance, that goes towards like,
Yeah.
events that are happening. Sometimes it might go, we use this sometimes. So like maybe if we were doing something of our philanthropy, when, maybe saving up to like maybe donate or maybe something like for some sort of activity we were doing for our philanthropy and making sure we had like the funds, to get the supplies to do whatever it was we'd be doing. So I think that's like a misconception. I think maybe to like the partying,
Yeah.
I think, people think that's all members do. And again, that's not the case.
Hmm.
I know plenty of students, I've seen it where, they don't party. They don't, I've had members who have never drank,
Yeah.
like, and I think that could be a misconception. I think within the residence halls too, I think people are concerned like, oh, that's going to be the person who's going to act up. That's going to be the person who's going to cause trouble in the halls. And
Hmm.
I know that's usually not the case. If anything, that's like somebody you don't see as much of because you are probably either
Yeah.
involved in the organization. Sometimes if they're brand new, they're probably over the house somewhere. So I think that's a misconception. People are like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have like, 5 or 10, members. I know what's gonna happen here. Is this gonna be like, are they gonna bring the party onto the floor? And I really I found that, at least in my experiences, to be not true. And like I say, if anything, I'll see them out, in other spaces than I would in
Mm.
on the corridor or in the hall. So yeah, so those are I'd say some big, misconceptions that I've seen. So
Yeah. That last one that you mentioned is probably the one I've seen and to be honest with you, experienced
right,
most as well. That coming from an institution that did not have a very active FSL population that we were aware of as like a typical student, I didn't hear about much.
right,
What I did hear about was not activities I was choosing to engage in when I was an undergrad
right,
student.
right,
And I'm sure that other things occurred. We just never knew they were happening.
right.
We weren't directly involved. So I think for me, entering into like a resident director position and being told like a lot of your students are going to be involved in fraternity sororities, some of your RAs are, like it I wasn't sure what to expect
Right,
coming into that space, having no experience other than those misconceptions about
right,
what was going to be happening. Very quickly, I learned exactly what you did, that the students who I knew were affiliated were elsewhere,
right.
weren't in the halls very often. And when
Mhm.
they were very kind and engaged and
Yep, yep.
were not doing the things that I would believe that they were going to be doing.
See that they were doing exactly.
I mentioned that RA that I had hired who was very involved in her sorority and Acropolis, but I've had so many RAs choose to get involved in that experience,
Yep.
some of which most recently I had an RA this year who actually applied for a sorority because of the community and leadership that she gained from being an RA.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Being
Yep.
an RA made
Yep.
her then want to get involved in another community
Hmm.
outside of the residence hall, which is something that I hadn't experienced previously,
Right.
and was again the exact opposite of that misconception that
Exactly.
I had of Greek students are just going to party all the time.
Right,
And that is truly what I expected coming
right,
into this space because that is the image,
right, exactly.
for a lack of a better way to put it. Whether it be a movie, a TV show,
Right,
or being a student and what we're told, uh,
exactly,
which is a
exactly.
whole different conversation around.
Right?
Um, oh man, a whole different conversation around perception. Um, but a really interesting one all the same.
Right. Yeah.
But thinking about that leadership and community piece, how can we tap into that in the residence halls, of these students who are choosing this experience for leadership and community largely? How can we better tap into that in your experience?
I mean, I think something that, and I've seen like, and I've heard RAs and I've heard like, professional staff say this, like, well, I don't know anything about it.
Hmm.
You don't really need to know anything about it. You
Yeah.
don't really need to know, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to understand the terms, but maybe just like, just kind of checking in with that student, like, hey, how's it going? How's the experience going? Just kind of, seeing how they're doing. And I think that can mean something to them. I think that can mean, that can mean a lot to them. I think too, maybe also to kind of understanding what they're doing, and I think again that might mean something to them. Even if it's something you would never do,
Yeah.
and something you don't understand, it's something you don't get, that's okay. But they may have a reason for doing it too. Like again, in the Northeast, it's not as much, but I know out here and I know down south, it is not uncommon where you have like mom's in a sorority, daughters joined a sorority, mom was in the sorority, grandma was in the sorority. You might have three generations
Great grandma was
somebody.
in the sorority.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is not uncommon. Like where you're joining the organization that family members have joined, and there's a lot of like kind of pressure, with that kind of like, and for somebody that's a very big thing, So Russian, during the recruitment experience, maybe kind of understanding if they seem kind of like a little bit like on edge. I mean, yeah, there could be a reason. It could be like, oh my gosh, if I don't get in, what do I tell my family? I had experience one time where I had a student where her roommate got into the organization that the student's big sister, like their real big sister, like their,
Hmm.
family big sister was a part of, but she didn't.
Yeah.
So roommate and big sister were a part of this organization. She was not.
Yeah.
So and there were feelings about, kind of about that. So I think, kind of like, kind of understanding, respecting, having those conversations. I think maybe too also like again, kind of maybe meeting them where they are. I
Hmm.
think it's always good. I had a CLT 2 years ago. All of them joined an organization, joined a sorority. And
Yeah.
in the back of my mind, the very back of my mind, I'm like, well, we had a good run in the fall. I don't know if they're gonna be back in the spring because of this. No, they're like, nope, we still want to be involved. Just let us work out our schedules and let us figure out some things. And yeah, we started a little bit later. We started about 2 or 3 weeks later in the semester because we had to figure that and figure out schedules. But they were like,
Yeah.
no, we enjoyed this. We like this. It's a good experience. We want to be involved. And I kind of like want, and I'm glad I kind of kept my mind open with that instead of being like, we have to start on this date. And if we're not, then we're not going to do it. I wanted to be respectful of their time.
Yeah.
This is something that they wanted to do. And they brought a lot to our CLT, the fact that they had this leadership community experience that they were able to bring into the residence halls. And I think their programming was even better in the spring than it was in the fall because they were gaining that experience.
Hmm.
So I was so glad that they when you stayed on and worked together, and we had a great year. It was a really strong. It was a small CLT, three of them, and CLT meaning Hall Council.
Yeah.
Which I know but like like, I know the viewer, not a viewer like may know, I know may know that, but because I know it's all called something different in other schools.
Hmm.
But I think those things. I think we can do as professionals to kind of help kind of bridge the gap and make it a little bit closer. Maybe having like if there's a service program, maybe specifically inviting those students, the students fraternity sororities. Because I
Yeah.
remember being undergrad, I was always looking for community service hours.
Hmm.
Always, always, always. So if they were right there in front of me, perfect. I don't have to go, I can do it right in my residence hall. I don't even have to leave my building to do it.
Hmm.
Or something or pointing me in that direction too. Oh, there's this thing that I can go to and I can do my service hours. Because a lot of times too, students join because of the philanthropy. They
Yeah.
join because they wanted to be involved in, community service. So there's sometimes, again, that's another kind of misconception that's all about the social life. There's
Hmm.
also much more to it, where it can also be about like, yeah, I want to be a part of something. I want to be helping people. I want to be involved in something. And I think even now, today's generation of students, I think I've seen that now more than ever, where they want to be involved and they want to help people
Yeah.
and they want to like do service-based things. And sometimes it's a matter of finding those things. But if we in the residence halls can also offer that, I think too, and making sure like there are, at least our affiliated students know about it. I think they might be, oh yeah, perfect. Then I can do this. It's literally right upstairs.
Mhm.
I can go up a flight of stairs and it's in the first floor lobby and I could be there and I can do that. So, you
Yeah.
know, so I'd say those are things definitely. And just making sure to have those conversations, making sure, again, just, again, it could mean it could mean so much to have somebody just kind of be like, yeah, so how's it going? How did recruitment go? And maybe they won't tell you everything, but maybe they'll be at least kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm a part of this and I'm really enjoying it. I'm really having, really, and sometimes too, you can kind of jump off of there too and kind of go into other conversations,
Hmm.
with that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think that we underestimate how much care matters to the students that we're serving,
right,
just like showing them that we care. Like
right,
I've had so many students that have been like the exact point that you're bringing up, like asking them, "Hey, how is recruitment going? Like, how are
right.
you doing? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you like, how is it?" Um, I've had students go, "I forgot that I even told you that I was trying to get into a sorority."
Right.
I forgot that we even had this conversation. And I watched that connection matter
Hmm.
so much just
Right.
in that space. And I think that that is, in so many ways, like a student choosing to get involved in an organization of this type is another space for us to be like, tell me why. Like, why is it
Right.
important to you? Like, that's a way in, like, very
Right.
easily for us,
Right.
especially when it is the conversation of family and those things. It'd be like, do you have family who is involved in this? Like, what does being in this sorority specifically mean to you? Um, and I hear that from a lot of my students with the philanthropy piece and those spaces where it's like, I need to be in this one.
Right.
And this is the sorority that I want to be in. This is the fraternity I want to be in because my great great grandmother was in it and it matters to me for these reasons. And I think that provides like insight into a student's experience, but
Right.
also for us and like living and working, it provides space for us to kind of unpack that experience with them.
Mhm.
And be
Exactly.
like, why is this so important to you? What are you hoping to get out of it? And it kind of gives us that in
Right.
a
Which
unique
again,
way.
you don't need to be affiliated to have that conversation. And I think some
Exactly.
people think that you do. You
Hmm.
definitely don't. And I think too, whenever even if like they were like even the students like, yeah, that's right, we had that conversation, or they'd be like, or sometimes I think the ones that I've come across I'm like, oh wow, so you knew that? And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm an RD, I know everything.
Yes, we do.
Right. But I think they appreciate the fact that you took the time to
Yeah.
be like, oh, I saw your name on there on
Hmm.
some sheet somewhere. And I just want, yeah, just see how it's going. I think that means a lot. That means a lot to them. And I think it means more than I think we even realize that it does.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't see it.
Stressful time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think the fact that we are kind of taking that step and kind of having that conversation and showing that we care and just being
Mhm.
like, yeah, and we're not judging them on it. We're just like, how's it going? And I think, for them, I think they definitely they appreciate that. They
Definitely.
appreciate that. I know for me as being affiliated, like I've been able to kind of hop into other conversations, like as I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, wait, I know, like, wait until you get your big sister, or wait until, wait until you're on the other side and become like, you see
Mhm.
see a class, another class after you. And those, I've had those conversations having had like, the experience. But even if I didn't have that, even if it was just more just like from the kind of just like I hate, just how, how's it going? And then also too kind of realizing that, again, like, maybe somebody again is like feeling it because like, oh, like there's a lot of family pressure, there's a lot of like, you know, all my friends have joined, and I
Yeah.
want to be a part of this thing, with them. So it's like a, kind of waiting because like waiting could be I speaking from personal experience, waiting for that knock on the door is
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Oh my
Mhm.
God, is there going to be like, and I remember like I would like wait for it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had to knock on the door and open the door, and there wasn't anybody there, because I'd psyched myself out,
Mhm.
but it's kind of like, but just things, things like, things like that. I think just being kind of mindful that this is something for somebody could be very important to them and
Yeah.
kind of understanding why it's important to them. And it's not, this isn't necessarily isn't just, oh, because I get to party every, I'm
Yeah.
gonna go to parties every week. There's, I think in many cases, it's much more than that. It
Mhm.
actually used to be like, and I can, my fraternity sorority system that I'm from is different from here, and it's also like a long time ago. But usually, the person who was just in it for the social life, that you don't, those weren't as often as you think it was.
Yeah.
And usually, you could tell when somebody was like that.
Mhm.
And we used to call them letter getters because
Ooh.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because they were only in it for the letters. They could not care less about the organization they belonged to.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't care about like the values of the organization. Didn't care about the members. They just wanted to go and party. So like sometimes we would actually,
Yeah.
yeah, and at Keene it was like different because we were so small. We're
Mm-hmm.
smaller, so our organizations were closer. So you might have a really good friend in another organization, and that was not uncommon. So
Yeah.
maybe you would say to be like, hey, that person, I know that person. I see that person at parties. That person's a letter
Mhm.
getter. Kind of like, we're not going to tell you what to do, but just kind of be mindful of that person. And so and the other person like, oh, thanks. So we kind of like, you kind of talk with each other about that kind of stuff.
Huh. That is so interesting that there would be stigma against what people think is the stigma
Right.
around like that's such an interesting dichotomy there.
Yeah.
I'm
And
gonna have to think about that one a little bit.
it's
Um,
fascinating because
yeah,
and most people work like people like you would like I said, it would not be uncommon for
yeah,
somebody in the other sorority who I knew would come to me and be like, hey, this person doesn't care about your organization. They're just in it for the letters.
yeah.
And we would kind of warn each, it would not be uncommon for us to kind of warn each other because of that, because of somebody doing
Out.
something like that.
Huh.
Yeah,
More you know.
yeah.
Well, Carter, I think my next question for you then kind of touches on some of what you just spoke about. You've kind of repeated this notion that residence life staff don't need to have been in a sorority or fraternity to be able to support students in Greek life,
Right.
which I firmly, firmly agree with. But what are maybe like a couple things that you think RAs and professional staff should understand about Greek life or culture to be effective supporters and educators for students in the organizations?
I think too, like we kind of touch upon, like just kind of understanding why somebody's doing it, and then maybe for a deeper reason than you think.
Hmm.
And just kind of being understanding of that, being just kind of like, and again, like, not needing to know all the terminology, not
Yeah.
needing to understand the culture, but just kind of being like, okay, just kind of like, understand and kind of understanding, and why this person's doing it, and maybe just kind of like, and I think too, sometimes too, I think they may come to you. Maybe they can't talk a lot about all of it,
Hmm.
but I think sometimes too, it's helpful when it's somebody that's not involved. Because like when you're involved in the organization, sometimes that's your world.
Yeah.
That's your world. Those are the people you see all the time, 24/7. And sometimes you need a break.
Yeah.
You need a rest. You need a break. And kind of like, if are kind of stressed out, maybe there's some other, unfortunately, maybe there are some deeper issues. Maybe there's something, like, there could be like the hazing, things like that. But sometimes it can be like, yeah, I'm just, stressed out dealing with my pledge class, my associate class, kind of stressed with, out with that and just kind of stressed out, kind of feeling like all this time, it was just, it's just like a lot. I think just being a good listening ear, I think sometimes that's all affiliate students sometimes needs. It's just like that listening ear. And sometimes it can be from somebody who is not, a lot of times, again, it can be somebody who's not affiliated because they can offer a different perspective
Hmm.
from like 1,000 miles away
Yeah.
that, and kind of like, I don't want to say outsiders, but just a different opinion
Mhm.
that I think could be really kind of, it could be really kind of, really valuable. I think just too, just kind of like maybe thinking about like, not, I think too, maybe too, I think we as professionals in our RAs, like just because you're not seeing as much of them, the affiliated students doesn't mean they still don't want to be involved in the community.
Yeah.
And I think instead of just kind of dismissing and be like, okay, they're not going to show. I've heard sometimes, and I've seen it happen where they're like, yeah, I want to come to this program. Wednesdays are the best nights for us, for me and my organization, because that's we don't do much on Wednesdays or Thursdays. And maybe it's kind of working around schedules like a little bit, you
Hmm.
know. But I think too, but like I think they still would want to be involved in the community. Maybe just sometimes they just have other things going on where they may not be as there as available as they were in the past, but they still want to be a part of the community. They're still like, oh, there's that cool program. Oh, that's awesome. Cool critters is coming, with the animals. And it's like, oh, I definitely want to, be there for that. But I think like not dismissing the fact that they don't want anything to do with the hall community, which may definitely, may not be the case, and kind of just making sure they
Yeah.
still inviting them, kind of connecting with them. Maybe there's some program that happens together, you
Hmm.
know, um, and having those like, definitely like those kind of conversations, I think will all, I think those are things we can do to kind of have that strong partnership. And then, yeah, you might have somebody who, that fraternity member, that sorority member who decides, oh, I want to be an RA, I want to be an RA because I got a lot out of it. For me, it was the opposite. I was an RA first, and then I became affiliated. But then I realized, oh, I can actually do both.
Yeah.
I can do both, and I can make a career out of doing, out of doing both. So
Hmm.
I think, but I think having those conversations, and again, like I said, but not assuming that they're going to be out and about every night of the week, which some people are, which I've seen some people do. But I
Hmm.
think if you offer, kind of like, if you still include them in the community, I think if they want to be involved, they're going to find ways where they can still be involved in the community. And I've seen it happen many times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've happened many times here.
Yeah. I completely agree with all of those things. I think there's so much assumption that
Right.
comes in when we're talking about students and fraternities and sororities that is so different than any other
Right.
leadership organization
Nothing like it.
students might
Nothing like
choose
it.
to involve themselves in. Like thinking about something you just spoke about in like a practical step for residence life staff to take being, hey, let's think about when, if you have students in these organizations in your halls, maybe let's think about when they're busy as far as when we're organizing our hall programs. And
Exactly.
that is such like maybe like a baseline thing to consider, but I don't know that we do that in the same way that I might try to schedule my team meeting around my RA's classes.
Right.
I might try to schedule an event around, okay, I know that I have a lot of engineering majors who are all in class until 7 p.m. on Thursdays. I can't do an event before then.
Right.
If that is something I'm aware of, I'm going to plan around that. And yet we don't really think about
Don't
that
think
as
about it.
far as it comes to sororities and fraternities, even when it's such a large
Exactly.
historical thing for students
Exactly.
to engage in. And I think that's such a good and important piece of practical advice to be thinking about. Something that I also try to do in my halls that you also spoke to is trying to plan programming that the students that I have are going to go to.
Right.
And that very much aligns. Like I do a lot of service events because I have a service living learning community in in my space.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
but that also invites, I do a lot of very targeted recruiting to sororities and fraternities because
Right.
I'm like, hey, we're doing service stuff as a community. You should come and be a part of this because I know this is a value you have.
Exactly.
I think that that is something that we can be thinking about at a larger level and being like, what are the components of why students are joining these spaces and how can we incorporate those into our programming and into our practice?
Exactly.
And that is something that I don't think we think about enough when it
No.
comes to fraternities and sororities. And I think it's a very, again, maybe a very baseline practical step that we're already doing
Right.
other orgs. Like I'm not going to schedule my RAs one-on-one during their club meeting.
Right. Exactly.
Like I'm not going to do that. Why would I not ask them when they have something for their sorority?
Right. Precisely.
And that is something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I mean, I can't speak for like Miami, but
Yeah.
I can speak for King State. Like
Hmm.
every fraternity, sorority, all of us, we all had our meetings on Sundays.
Yep.
We were always on Sundays. They were almost always at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. So if if there was somebody who wanted to do a program, I'd be like, I would love to, we have our meetings on Sundays, and
Hmm.
and almost all of us, that almost seemed like a organization system thing where just
Ah,
everyone met on Sunday nights.
mhm.
So, but kind of knowing that if there was something similar here, kind of knowing that, okay, it's like, oh, every organization meets on this night, kind of planning, planning around that,
Yeah.
trying something, trying like again, like trying like a different night. But
Yeah.
yeah, kind of thinking a little bit about what you said about like the different kind of like the baseline, the thinking, just yeah, kind of like again, just like you might have somebody from like the newest member class and they're looking for like that oh, how do I learn how to do this? How do I learn how to do that? And I could bring that to my organization. Oh,
Yep.
that's really cool. Oh, I learned about leadership. Oh my gosh, let me bring that to my, let me bring that to my to my organization, or vice versa. Maybe they have like that experience and they can bring it and they bring it to the halls.
Yeah.
Just those kind of things. But yeah, like you're saying, like things we do like a little bit, but maybe even thinking bigger and broader and
Definitely.
wider picture, I
Mhm.
think is really, 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 I think is really helpful. I think it'd be really good.
I do too.
Yeah, yeah.
Carter, thank you so much for being
It's
here
over already?
today. That wraps up our time.
Oh my
We're
gosh.
already, I know it goes quick, doesn't it?
Wow.
But that wraps up our time together today, Carter. Thank you so, so, so much for joining me. I hope you had a
Thank
good
you.
time, and enjoyed chatting today.
Me too. I could talk about, you saw me moving my hands and stuff like that. I am very passionate about this. I love the subject. I love this. I love talking about this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
inviting me.
thank you all for joining us, those listening on this episode of ResEd Chat. If you have an idea of a topic or a person that you would like to have on the show, please let us know by reaching out to RoomPact. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.